conservative, then, is to prefer the familiar to the unknown, to prefer the tried to the untried, fact to mystery, the actual to the possible, the limited to the unbounded, the near to the distant, the sufficient to the superabundant, the convenient to the perfect, present laughter to utopian bliss. Michael Joseph Bookshop.
For fantasy is true, of course. It isn't factual, but it's true. Children know that. Adults know it too, and that's precisely why many of them are afraid of fantasy. They know that its truth challenges, even threatens all that is false, all that is phony, unnecessary, and trivial in the life they have let themselves be forced into living. They are afraid of dragons because they are afraid of freedom. Ursula K. Le Guin.
The racism, misogyny, and counter-rationality of the reactionary right in American politics for the last several years is a frightening exhibition of the destructive force of anger deliberately nourished by hate, encouraged to rule thought, invited to control behavior. I hope our republic survives this orgy of self-indulgent rage. Also Ursula K. Le Guin.
Conservatism consists of exactly one proposition, to wit: there must be in-groups whom the law protects but does not bind, alongside out-groups whom the law binds but does not protect. Frank Wilhott.
Dear woke SJWs, leave my games alone! Stop using our pastimes to push your agendas. SJWs come into a space and then proceed to destroy it from the inside. There is one other entity on the planet that does that. A virus. Various posts online.
Do you know what I hate most about this hobby, Matt? It's the
what
smell. The stench. It permeates everything. Mr. Derwinski.
Mr. Derwinski. Yes, it's me. It's DM Matt. It's Dungeon Master of None. We're doing something different.
That's right. We have something very special. You might even call this a very special episode of Dungeon Master of None, where we're going to talk about, matters of serious importance that are both simultaneously ridiculous and of grave and extreme meaningfulness.
Right. We want to give kind of a brief history of the current channels of thought of reactionaries in D&D, because I don't know if they're like peaking or reaching a fevered pitch, but I just feel like I'm noticing them more and more. And as Rob said, it's both kind of hilarious because these people are clowns, but it's also like very serious, and like, lots of people can get hurt. That's the point of reactionary thought. So we're going to try and take these people seriously, but we're not going to avoid dunking on them, if that makes sense.
The purpose of this episode is not exclusively to mock the anti-woke reactionary elements of this hobby, but that is a fun bonus. We do want to talk about
a little side benefit
seriously, because the point is that if, somebody once said that if you allow Nazis into your show, or you allow Nazis into your bar, suddenly you're Nazi bar. Suddenly you're Nazi band. You're Nazi, you're running a Nazi show. Like that's just how it works, right? This is the paradox of tolerance, right? You want to be inclusive. You want to allow all people. You don't want to exclude even conservatives with terrible politics. But in doing so, you create a, for lack of a better term, safe space, which then they proceed to take advantage of. That's why reaction, conservatism to an extent, but Nazism, fascism are incompatible with free societies, right? Is because they do not share the same values, right? They do not care about intellectual diversity. They do not care about free expression. They do not care about free thought or democracy in general. So you can allow them into your spaces, but if you do so, they will happily run everybody else out, either through force or coercion. And so I think it's important that we talk about this, because D&D, TTRPGs in general, has a large, vocal, and persistent reactionary element, which I think is losing power and has been for a decade or more, but remains substantial. And I'm not going to name names, but there are people with attachments to this element who are involved at the highest levels of Wizards of the Coast and other TTRPG companies, or who do not see these people as threats. And so I think it's very important that we take this seriously. And Matt has done a lot of work digging into the diseased and poisoned minds of this element of the hobby. But we don't want anyone to think that this is just for fun, or that the whole point is to point and laugh, because I think it is important that we discuss this and take it seriously and inoculate ourselves against it.
So I came to this research problem with, I guess, three related questions. So, like, why is the reactionary right sort of getting obsessed with D&D and games and role-playing games? What are people on the far right saying about D&D in the recent past and right now? And, in what ways in this moment are their views evolving and intensifying? And I think, as Rob said, like, there, kind of coming up, there will be maybe some unpleasant views. So just kind of a warning for that.
There's a big content warning on this episode, so just be aware. We're not going to pull out the most loathsome things, but in order to discuss this, we have to give space to some pretty awful arguments just to refute and examine them. So just a heads up if that's going to bother you, which it is fine if it does, but that is going to happen.
All right, Rob, let's hop into our DeLorean and head back a good 30 plus years.
Let's take a quantum leap back to when Quantum Leap was on the air. 1985.
All right. America, 1985, Rob. It's the height of the Satanic Panic.
Is not coincidence, not when you have careful documentation,
I love this guy.
You have careful notes, you have eyewitnesses. For
He's
instance,
our favorite
one
psychologist.
Case, the parents were actually saw their child summon Dungeons and Dragons demons into his room before he killed himself. Another case, the kid thought he had
laugh about that. That's not funny. I mean, I assume that is actually a suicide, but what a ridiculous thing to say. We talked about this
This was what was on 60 Minutes, right? Yeah, there was a satanic panic. There's people saying, yes, Dungeons & Dragons is causing people to summon demons into their child's bedrooms, right? And to summarize what was going on here, right? So we had some concerned parents. We had a lot of right-wing Christians, almost exclusively, a couple pop pseudo-psychologists, and then just a general milieu of anti-rock and roll, anti-Satanist activists who claim that, there's basically satanic sacrifices happening everywhere, and that D&D was actual witchcraft and devil worship and was created intentionally to harm children.
We talked about this in our previous episode, which is one of my favorites. You should listen to it. But I'm not sure if we addressed this, but looking back, this has all of the hallmarks of a mass hysteria. It really is shocking how gripped the minds of ordinary Americans were by the concept that there were massive satanic sex cults indoctrinating their children, murdering and eating babies, all of these things. The McMaster's preschool, which was at the center of the initial satanic panic, they dug up the grounds looking for tunnels, where they were purportedly...
An armed guy looking for tunnels where children are? I mean, that would never happen in our enlightened time. Obviously, this happened just a couple years ago, with the Comet Ping Pong
Comet Ping Pong,
thing,
right? Well, and I think that's why... I think we talked about this again in the episode. There's a clear through line between the Satanic Panic and QAnon and many other conspiracy theories that plague us in the present. And I don't think that it's so much a resurgence as it never really went away and it just continues to evolve. But yeah, the Satanic Panic, we do not mean to make light of it because it was very serious and many people went to jail, real jail, for things that did not ever happen. Completely invented by the fevered minds of bored suburban Americans. But I think where Matt is, or what we addressed in the last episode, what we want to talk about partially, is that D&D got caught in the crossfire, but honestly got off lucky. This hobby,
right? It was rock and roll and people who like were Satanists who got real shit on them, right? Teachers,
daycare workers, like really, again, the most vulnerable and at risk members of society. Not, again, the bullying was real, the mockery was real, the fire and brimstone from both teachers and religious figures, that was very real, but the actual effect on Dungeons and Dragons was fairly limited, comparative.
And I think it's also important to note that, like, while not every member of the Satanic Panic was like a member of the Republican Party or anything like that, this came from a very conservative place, right? These were people concerned with Satanists, right? They were, conservative. I don't know. It's funny that I think this mind virus or mass hysteria, like, it did jump into the mainstream, maybe in a way that, like, today's like QAnon conspiracies quite haven't won over the sort of normal, folks in suburbia to the same extent, though maybe they're getting there. I don't know, but it's important to note it came. Yeah. Sure.
There's like, whenever there's, oh God, what was it? What's that? That furniture company, ever something, there was that hysteria about them like shipping children in cabinets. Like that originated with QAnon and leaked into the mainstream. But like the whole, Matt's right that the generalized, Democrats or whoever are servants of Satan and they're eating your children, like that doesn't quite seep into the mainstream the way that it very much did in the 80s. Like that this was something that was on the lips and in the hearts of many ordinary suburban Americans, again, because it's on 60 fucking minutes. Like, boy, we live in I know that this present moment feels like the stupidest that it has ever been, and it is, but this country has been stupid in many ways for decades.
Yes. It's always a nice reminder. And okay, let's fast forward 25 years, because while the Satanic Panic, very much like went away for normal people, for people who are not normal on the far right, it did not. Anti-Dungeon and Dragon and anti-RPG sentiment, like on the far right, like stuck around just because those same people stuck around. Here's an example from 2010 from our least favorite right-wing bigot and failed Keebler elf, Pat Robinson, on the 700 Club.
I don't know what game you're talking about. I know there's one called Dungeons and Dragons that literally destroyed people's lives. I mean, they got into this thing and it was like demonic. I don't know what game you're talking about, but if it's based on magic and the occult and that sort of thing, stay away from it. There are other games you can play, but don't get into that. You say, is it wrong or not wrong? I just think that...
I love the occult.
Occult. Dungeons and Dragons. Get yourself out of the occult. I'm sorry. I don't get to hear those kinds of accents now that I've moved away from Texas. Pat Robertson sucks, but that hearing him say those words in that accent,
occult, just stay away from magic. So like these views are still out there, but like,
well, and I'm positive I've mentioned this on the pod before, but it remains sort of a very clear memory of what this was like. But in the early aughts, I was living in Oklahoma with Matt. And I was listening to the radio. I wasn't living with
We slept in a big bed together every night.
We had bunk beds. No.
We had bunk beds and little sleeping caps, and you would carry the little candle on the holder.
I carried the candle, and yeah. So yeah, it was in Oklahoma, and this was when one Harrius Potterus was very popular. Right. And it was impossible for the radio to not mention it. I was listening to the radio, and I don't know, it was some news item about the actors or the next movie or whatever, and then the jockey or the host had to say, Harry Potter does involve witchcraft and magic, and so you should be careful about letting your children, listen to or watch or read the Harry Potter books. And I even then, steeped in conservative American culture, it was shocking to me, and it remains shocking. And that's the kind of the fear of Satan has never left them. It is with them always, and witchcraft. And magic.
You gotta
and the occult.
The occult. You gotta watch out for the occult. But I think it's around this time, so that we have to introduce a new element to our story, in that people who love the occult and Satan and aliens and swashbuckling aliens and punching aliens and killing monsters with a loincloth wearing barbarian warrior. Kind of entered a new challenger approaches.
That's right.
That's right. So, Rob, let's actually, now that we're 20 minutes into this, let's actually start our story, because I think this is the real beginning point of modern reactionary thought in D&D. And let's start it in 2013 and the mid-teens. Rob, can you tell me a little bit about the Sad Puppies?
I can, and I wish that I couldn't, but I can. So this is not, by any stretch of the imagination, the first or the origins, but this is I think one of the first part of the current wave that we're in. The Sad Puppies was a reactionary, I'm going to call it a block, a coalition of science fiction authors. So their main objection was that the Hugo Awards were getting too woke, and this actually predates.
They didn't use the term woke.
Yes,
but
this predates the widespread use of the term woke, but I guarantee you that's what they meant. So the guys involved there were not that many of them, but they were authors like Brad Torgerson, Larry Correia, a guy named Vox Day. These are all science fiction authors of middling success. That their books are fine. I have read some of them. They're real classic science fiction, have spacesuit, will travel, shooting aliens type of stuff. It's fine. They're pulpy science fiction. That's not the issue. But these guys started to get frustrated that people like Cameron Hurley and N.K. Jemisin, women, people of color, were starting to dominate the Hugo Awards. Now, there are differing points of view, but it is, in my opinion, on the face of it, absolutely risible that any of the winners of the Hugos in those years did not deserve it. The Hugos went to really excellent original pieces of fiction. They did not go to swashbuckling, pulpy science fiction, alien books. I'm sorry, guys.
The crazy thing is, in the history of the Hugos, maybe there's been a couple of those, but even back in the 60s and 70s, they were usually going to novels or novellas that did weird stuff, right? That pushed the boundaries of speculative fiction as a genre.
And the science fiction and fantasy as genres have huge problems with reactionary elements and racism and misogyny, but there have always been really groundbreaking, forward-thinking, interesting writers and books, and those have always kind of been the ones that won the Hugos, because the Hugos are about who's got the cool new ideas.
Right, because most of the people who vote in the Hugos are other science fiction authors. They kind of discovered a loophole.
They specifically are. It's a slate of, or it's a voting by science fiction authors.
But anyone can register, and that's what they discovered. They're like, okay, for $40 or whatever, you can register for Worldcon or whatever the convention is and vote. And so they submitted a bunch of slates full of, they're like, hey, we want the award to go to, regular white guy who wrote regular sci-fi story, as opposed to interesting sci-fi story, more likely written by someone who is not white or a man.
Right. So sorry, I got sidetracked, but basically this was a revolt or I'm going to call it just a political movement to object to the way that the Hugos were going. And here's a bit from Torgerson, which I think really sums this up. In the last decade, we've seen the Hugo voting skew ideological, as Worldcon and fandom alike have tended to use the Hugos as an affirmative action award, giving Hugos because a writer or artist is, in quotes, insert underrepresented minority or victim group here, or because a given work features insert underrepresented minority or victim group here characters. You'll notice that this language will likely sound familiar to you if you are online, because this is the kind of shit that reactionary nerds still say. I want to read a little bit from N.K. Jemison's acceptance speech from WizCon.
Yeah, read that.
Here's the sort of like juicy bit. She says, she sums up sort of what's been happening. We've seen that bigotry directed not just toward black authors, but authors of all races other than white, not just along the racial continuum, but the axis of gender, sexual orientation, nationality, class, and so on. We've seen it aimed by publishers and book buyers and reviewers and con organizers towards readers in the form of every whitewashed book cover, every "those people don't matter" statement, and every all-white, mostly male book con presenter slate. This stuff has always been there. It's just more intense, more violent, and now the bigots feel threatened.
Right. So I like that part of of her speech, in that, like, yes, this has always been there. It's just, I think in like around this time, the mid-aughts, right? This was 2014 when she gave the speech. Yep. We see it bubbling to the surface in like organized ways, right?
Why I think this is important is that this is a clear example of what we mean when we say reaction. So I wanna pause here and define reaction or reactionary as a political view, and it's essentially conservative. It favors a return to the status quo, right? But it's deeper and even more fundamental than bog standard conservatism. It rejects the idea of using of social or any sort of like social change whatsoever, even in a sort of like a positive conservative environment. And this sort of popped up as a term in response to the 1848 revolutions, when the reaction to those revolutions was so powerful, so conservative, and so intense. But I think it's such a useful term because it also describes how reactionaries feel, how they respond to change. Because it is not a thoughtful, it is not a reasoned stance. That doesn't make it illegitimate. It doesn't, I think it's wrong, but that's not wrong because it's emotional. But I must be clear that it is an emotional gut level reaction to change, right? Reaction and reactionaries are responding to with vitriol and often violence to just the very idea of change. And the reason why I want to focus on reaction is because these guys always existed and they always had these views, but then they suddenly need to make a point of it because they feel that they are no longer in control. They feel like they are no longer in power because suddenly the Hugos go to women or people of color for a few years.
And in some cases, that feeling is correct.
Yes, right. Sometimes they're right. Yeah.
Maybe, okay,
the world is changing.
I don't think anyone's going to say that, for example, speculative fiction publishing is out of the hands of, let's say, conservative, rich white men, but it is more out of their hands than it used to be.
That's
right?
the thing, is they are correct, right, that the world is changing. Like, objectively, more women and people of color are there on, company boards. They're being published more often. They're
reading
office.
fantasy books, science fiction books more
and
than
they're playing
they used to.
Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
And so these things are true and correct. So in that sense, reactionaries and reaction is a logical response, but that doesn't make it correct. But they are reacting to something that is true and accurate sometimes, right? The true part is that, minorities, people who were traditionally marginalized, now have some standing or power. What they're generally wrong about is that reaction usually involves an element of, again, hysterical fear that there's like a cabal or they're taking over. There's clearly in many reactionaries' minds a fear that if people who were traditionally marginalized take over, they will do to them what white people have done to you know, others for centuries. Like they're very explicit about this fear. So bear that all in mind as we are talking about the through line from Sad Puppies to the present day.
Speaking of the through line, the Sad Puppies campaign, you know, regardless of the obvious crossover between, you know, most people who play RPGs are also fans of speculative fiction.
Right.
The leaders of the Sad Puppies campaign, Brad L. Torgensen and Larry Correia, are no strangers to role-playing games. Larry Correia has written novels set in the excellent wargaming / role-playing universe Iron Kingdoms, which I'm a big fan of. Not his novels, but the setting, Iron Kingdoms. And he recently published a Savage Worlds RPG in his Monster Hunters International setting. So there's plenty of crossover between these people and their fans.
By the way, if anyone cares, or if you're a fan of any of these people, I want to be clear that the issue is their political stance and their Sad Puppies, Rabid Puppies activism. I have read a couple of, I think, Torgensen's books. There's nothing especially objectionable about them. I don't want you to think, hearing about any of these authors, that they write like
Nazi
horrible,
fanfic
racist Nazi fiction. It's, you know, it's not. I'm sure there's parts of it that are problematic, but it's not like these are truly like loathsome people who write garbage. But anyway,
they may be truly loathsome people. Their texts may be.
Their texts are fine, is what I'm going to say. I want to make sure that the criticism is correctly targeted. So no one get mad at me if you like their books. I don't care.
So I'll also mention that, like, Vox Day, this gets more complicated. We don't have time to get into it. Ran an offshoot Hugo slate called Rabid Puppies. He
it's
also
basically Sad
has
Puppies on steroids and much more aggressive, but the same idea basically.
Right. And he's commented on role-playing games and that, like, they are also need to be the same kind of target. But before we talk about getting into the next stage of reaction, I just want to quickly ask the question. So we talked about where the anger was coming from. These people feel like, rightly or wrongly, that their group is being marginalized. What was their, like, actual critique? I sort of got that it was like, fiction or speculative fiction was becoming political. And no, we're not objecting to the fact that there are women here, but we're objecting that they get special treatment or something.
I mean,
like
it's a standard anti-affirmative action argument. The concern of the Sad Puppies, if we take it seriously, is that the votes were being given to books or authors based on their identities rather than the quality of their fiction. This is, again, in my opinion, completely unfounded. The books that win are good books, often incredible books. Again, not every Hugo's is a winner, but you can go through and take a look at the list, and it would be hard to pick out one that you think that would, be a good example of affirmative action. It's just a preposterous notion on the face of it. Also,
the only thing I'll
it is
add
not
there,
as if. Sorry, I want to be clear that white men do still win Hugos sometimes.
Yes.
Like it is not as
quite frequently and stuff.
Quite frequently, it's just a ridiculous argument. Again, we are I'm a pro affirmative action person. I think that it, in general, in the context of schooling, is a needed thing. But the idea that somebody who's putting their thumb on the scale for N.K. Jemisin or Cameron Hurley or who else is it's preposterous. They were just writing good books, and more women and people of color were voting. It's a very sorry, I got agitated. That's the argument, though.
Yes, there's no actual affirmative action in the Hugo Awards, right? That's a government program. They're just claiming there was. The other thing I want to add is that, and I think this is another common through line, the sort of these reactionary speculative fiction critics and readers, they claim that these new novels were all ideological, right? They are all political in a way that, that their favorite novels or science fiction ways are not. And I think this is a common like reactionary mode of thinking, is that ideology is something that the outgroup possesses, and that
Correct.
we ourselves have no political ideology.
Yes.
And that people are trying to put politics into something that maybe didn't have politics. But the only people who can ever have politics are some kind of disenfranchised group.
Right. This is important to emphasize because to the reactionary mind, the status quo is apolitical. The way that things are is the way that things are. There's just no, there's no ideology, there's no bias, there's no good or bad in the current state of affairs. So if you try to bring in anything different, or if you try to change anything, that is ideological, that is political, that is, again, you're getting politics in my gaming. And
Right.
We have heard all about this. I'm cranky just talking about it, but it's again, it's preposterous on the face of it. Clearly the status quo has a political element, right? There is a ideology behind the way that things are. But to the reactionary, and I think that there's just sort of and to be fair, I think there's just a status quo bias in human beings. And often this belief goes unexamined. And if you don't stop to think about it, or you're not interested in thinking about it, then it kind of makes sense, which is why these people continue to have relevance.
These people, let's pick one, Vox Day, right? As 2014 turned into 2015, Vox Day was one of the leading, like, kind of cutting edge among many, many other weirdos online, promoter of a thing called GamerGate. Again, just like with Sad Puppies, we don't have time to explain GamerGate, but let me just read a quick summary of it. And we're switching now from speculative fiction to video games. Of course, both of these things are like a much bigger deal than role-playing games, right? Role-playing games are so small compared to video games. Just as comparison, let's see, speculative fiction sales were 600 million last year. Video games, 188 billion. Role-playing games are small potatoes compared to either of these events. But here's what GamerGate was, in case you've forgotten or never heard of it. God bless you and keep you if that's you.
Some of you are too young to have really been online, and God, you are lucky for that. Yes. You don't know how bad it was, folks. You do not know how bad it was.
In the fall of 2014, under the premise that they were very angry at, quote, unethical, unquote, games journalists, a lie that persists today, thousands of people in the games community began to systematically harass, heckle, threaten, and dox several outspoken feminist women in their midst, few of whom were journalists. The harassment occurred under the social media hashtag GamerGate, which is still a hotbed of debate and anti-feminist resentment today. That's by Aja Romano, writing in Vox.
We don't have time to get into it, but it was a nothing burger. It was made up, and nerds were mad about women. And this sounds dismissive, but it is extremely easy to demonstrate in who they targeted and the way they talked. And anyone who tells you otherwise is full of shit. They were mad about women in games. They were mad about women in journalism, and they created increasingly elaborate theories as to why that wasn't true. Anyway.
Yeah.
Go on.
The jump, I mean, as I bet you can guess, was not a big one from video games to role-playing games. And GamerGaters, or GamerGate people, began making comparisons to Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons and the Satanic Panic and the current GamerGate crisis. From a GamerGate forum in January 2015, quote, attacks on gamers are not a recent affair. In fact, attacks on gamers date back to the early days of tabletop role-playing games such as Dungeons & Dragons, wherein concerned parents, police, and religious leaders attempted to get Dungeons & Dragons banned from the USA altogether.
Here's the thing that we should make clear in case it's not obvious. GamerGaters and their ideological descendants believe that the types of social criticism leveled at speculative fiction, video games, tabletop role-playing games are equivalent to or in the same vein as Bothered Against Dungeons & Dragons, about, Pat Robertson, Tipper Gore, all this, so when Anita Sarkeesian puts out, a really basic feminist critique of something like Duke Nukem, which is an extremely misogynistic game,
hey, she went after the low-hanging fruit, and in her defense, those are the easiest fruit to get. So
that's right. The fruit's right there.
And it was a funny video.
Why wouldn't you pick the low-hanging fruit? Why would you go for the high fruit? That's stupid. If you're not familiar, Anita Sarkeesian, I don't know. They're not very interesting videos to me because it's pretty basic stuff. It's pretty basic feminism. But if you were not familiar with the basic concepts of feminism, or you find criticism of your hobby threatening, then they were shocking and terrifying. And so the completely spurious argument is that Anita Sarkeesian and all of these, again, mostly women, but really anybody who was a cultural critic or woke, an SJW, was doing a Pat Robertson, doing a what's his name? Jack Thompson, the guy who tried to get video games banned, that stupid lawyer. Is he still alive? I think he died. Anyway, this is completely ridiculous. Criticizing video games, role-playing games, whatever, is not trying to get them banned. And the leftists, SJWs, woke people have no power to do so, even if they wanted to. Sorry, I'm getting carried away, Matt. The point is, this is what the GamerGaters purported to be saying, it pretended to be afraid of, may have actually been afraid of.
So while GamerGate was like in no way focused on the much, like 200 times smaller role-playing game community, there was infrequent discussion of, quote, problems with D&D in kind of GamerGate spaces. Here is a telling example from February 2016. Notice how long GamerGate lasts. Posted in a GamerGate forum in response to an IO9 article titled "How We Won the War on D&D" by Annalee Newitz. The article talks about how D&D is like a fairly open space these days. Again, this is from 2016. Like, there's lots of new people playing it. Here are, quote, Rob, why don't you read the first commenter on this article?
The thing is, now we have a whole... Sorry, I'm going to do a nerd voice for this. I feel like it.
Sure.
The thing is, now we have a whole other group engaging in a war on D&D. The swine who pretend to be gamers and want regular gaming under their control.
The next comment reads, and warning on this one, the stab in the back, only this time it's not a myth.
So if you're not familiar with the, and this is so sinister, I think, about the online reactionary right, but the stab in the back it's a Nazi myth about Jews, and about Jews either being willing to or stabbing, the good Aryan people of Germany in the back. And it predates even Nazis. It's an ancient anti-Semitic turn of phrase and idea about Jews. And this is GamerGate. Again, it was many things about it were truly loathsome, but one thing that kept popping up was the Happy Merchant, which is a anti-Semitic drawing of a Jewish person rubbing their hands together, and it would appear in innocuous forums and whatever. One journalist or whoever would suddenly be depicted as the Happy Merchant. By the way, this is really fucked up, but just this week, FTX went under, the Sam Bankman-Fried's cryptocurrency boondoggle, whatever. No, that dude sucks. No, defense of him, but I've been seeing reactionary cartoons posted where Sam Bankman-Fried is clearly depicted as the Happy Merchant. And an ordinary person doesn't know this, right? They don't know the anti-Semitic roots of all of these ideas and phrases and images, but they just that's how they spread. Sorry. I think it's very, very sinister because you don't just, it doesn't just happen, right? Somebody seeds that. Right. And there's Nazis and anti-Semites out there on the internet who are happy to bring people into this conspiracy theory. I don't know. It's a bad time for anti-Semitism, and it has been for the past, 7-8 years,
Well, the reason I wanted to bring that comment in particular into this discussion is that I think when you get reactionary thought, is that in general, like, they tend to bring in their other reactionary beliefs, through people who associate with them or something. Just like if you get one terrible belief or critique or reaction against something, it tends to bring them all in. You very rarely find someone who is like, worried about feminism who is not also worried about like immigration, right?
Right.
It at least in online spaces, it tends to come all together. And and again, we see some discussion of that. Yeah, that like, there's this sexism witch hunt going on against gamers and stuff like that. But
this is a good comment. I want to read this one too.
Sure, go ahead. And here's another comment from a GamerGate forum.
And yet they can't see the parallels between that and the PC witch hunts. This is politically correct in this context. PC witch hunts of the 90s and the current sexism witch hunts currently going on. Again, this is laid bare what they're saying, right? To look for or criticize sexism in gaming is the same as the Satanic Panic.
Ridiculous, in that you're not going to find a lot of, feminist avant-garde thinkers on the reactionary side of the Satanic Panic. But Rob, while this is going on, let's just switch over gears and go back to role-playing games, because in 2014, 15, 16, if you'll remember, these are the early years of 5th edition. This is selling like a huge amount, and let's talk about what's actually happening with D&D. So 5e was, kind of under the radar, was released during the rise of GamerGate, but before its feverish peak. The Player's Edition for 5e, released in 2014, had a short paragraph on page 121 on gender and sexual orientation. And I think this is important to note here because it was maybe the most, you might call, progressive or promoting diversity thing in basically the whole book, or one of the few things. There were a couple other things about, like, your character's appearance and stuff like that. But Rob, why don't you read that paragraph for us?
You don't need to be confined to binary notions of sex and gender. The elf god Corellin Larathian is often seen as androgynous, for example, and some elves in the multiverse are made in Corellin's image. You could also play a female character who presents herself as a man who feels trapped in a female body, or a bearded female dwarf who hates being mistaken for a male. Likewise, your character's sexual orientation is for you to decide.
Okay, so obviously, like, in 2022, we may have some quibbles with some of the language there, but like compared to, let's say, not having anything at all or earlier editions of Dungeons and Dragons, like, it's kind of like, wow, that's
it's
a
huge step up from women and men having different baked in stats.
Yes,
it represents it's a moderately big deal. Again, pretty far behind other hobbies, but it's something.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people would object to trapped in a body of a different sex.
Yes.
That's not the language we should use. But so Rob, I was like, okay, this came out in the middle of GamerGate. I'm going to do a ton of archaeology. I'm going to look at all of the right-wing blogs and forums from this time, and I could find very little controversy around this paragraph and other similar parts of the player's handbooks. I saw a couple responses in minor blogs and social media that kind of went along the lines of, sure, it's fine, but do they have to shove our faces into it? The one I could find that was most encapsulating of this sentiment is an RPG blog, and I'll read it for you here. Talking about the 5th edition Player's Handbook, but especially after the "don't let your parent enforce gender binaries" bullshit on the slide at my kid's park, a park for 3 to 5-year-olds. I've had my fill of progressive reformist nonsense. My response was my usual snarky, sarcastic self. Can't we just play without somebody bringing gender politics into everything?
This guy is definitely a Oakley's in the car PFP guy. Like, there's absolutely a Joe Rogan reply guy big hot dog neck fellow. Anyway.
Again, I think this is illustrative, and there's like two threads that kind of are important to notice of the general trends. Is one, like, people were pretty happy with 5th edition. A lot of people were, even people who were unhappy with Dungeons and Dragons when it first came out. There was not a huge backlash to some of its more inclusive language, and that among the small backlash that was going on, it definitely tended to emphasize ideas about children and gender, which I think anyone who has noticed how the country is going, that this is the big right-wing boogeyman.
Yeah.
Okay, so GamerGate, however, like is one of those mass hysterias that I think you brought that was kind of destined to spill over.
I mean, it's kind of the horrible spider web that connects everything, right? Some people online have a bad tendency to say everything is GamerGate, right? Because certain elements of Donald Trump's campaign or QAnon share DNA with GamerGate. But even though it's not the center, there's a good chance that if somebody is involved online in a reactionary forum or community, that they have a link to GamerGate, or that GamerGate links them to someone else. Like it's kind of inescapable. It's a hideous, corrupt, decaying spiderweb that binds them all together.
And it got into D&D. Beamdog Studios, who made an expansion to Baldur's Gate, released a new update in March 2016 that was one of many targets of GamerGate's ire in its heyday. Amber E. Scott, writer of the game, faced a wave of review bombing and harassment after it was discovered that a dialogue reveals an NPC cleric is a trans woman. Amber is a veteran Pathfinder contributor. Her credits include the first adventure of Wrath of the Righteous and Starfinder. And she's also the author of my favorite, third favorite Eberron book, The Secrets of Zendrick.
This is high praise from Matt. It's also a really good book. Amber E. Scott is a great RPG writer.
She was working on this video game, and after this backlash came out, Wizards, the pen and paper D&D people, they released a statement. This prompted WotC to release a statement on Facebook in April 2016, along with an image of the paragraph that Rob read earlier on gender from then director Nathan Smith. Quote, "To our community, Dungeons & Dragons stands by the stories our partners tell, and we fully support the choices Beamdog has made in developing Baldur's Gate Siege of Dragonspear. Inclusivity is a core value of Wizards of the Coast, and we believe that all people, regardless of ethnicity, background, and gender." By Nathan Stewart, director of Dungeons & Dragons.
I want to mention that this is tangentially related, but Pillars of Eternity, which is sort of a spiritual successor to Baldur's Gate. It is not a D&D game, but it is a top-down isometric RPG in the same vein. Had a similar controversy the year before in 2015 because it was Kickstarted, and one of the Kickstarter backers, one of the rewards is you could put a little like quote on a tombstone that people could read when they were going through the game, and the guy put in a pretty like gross transphobic joke for some reason, and he was asked to remove it after that was discovered. And boy, did GamerGaters not like that. That was censorship. That was SJWs. It was cultural Marxism, etc. Again, very much not a big deal, but either attacks on trans people or the furious resentment at the acknowledgement that they might exist, or that people who are non-binary might exist, is also a core element of this reactionary drive.
Yeah, I mean, GamerGate also given us that common phrase we all know and love today, SJW, social justice warrior.
Social justice warriors.
After this controversy and after Wizards' Facebook statement, GamerGaters react as you might accept. Here are a couple illustrative examples from the message board 4chan/TG. I think that stands for traditional games, over the next couple days.
Tabletop games?
Here, Rob. Tabletop.
Sure
I think it's traditional games.
Traditional games.
I wish I didn't know that. Here, Rob, why don't you kick us off on these comments?
Why do SJWs and feminists have to invade every refuge for normal men? Sorry.
Normal men.
Normal men. Very normal. You're very normal, dude. By the way, one of the guys in my D&D group is gay. He just isn't a
We can skip those.
No, I should say it. Sorry. He just isn't a damn that makes everything about how he loves the cock.
Here's another reply. Well, as long as they don't change any aspect or rule of the game, I don't see a problem. Just played once, but it was enough for me to realize no feminazi of SJW would ever grasp interest on it, since they lack the abstract intelligence necessary to understand it. So rest assured, my nerdy friend, your gaming afternoons with your pals are fine for now.
These are awful. My face when... MFW. Warhammer will be forever safe from this cancer, as Games Workshop doesn't give two fucking shits. Wrong, dude. Wrong.
Whoops.
Owned.
Poorly aged takes.
Yeah.
Women can never leave men alone. They're like children that never ever grow up. Western women were raised to see themselves as better than men. They were told that they could do whatever they want with no consequences. Hence, they invade our spaces and they act like complete
I don't want to make too much of this because these are just like random forum comments, but
the seeds are all there.
Yeah, the fact that people felt comfortable saying this in a place where other people can read it, it is telling. And again, these are more extreme because this is 4chan, but this is the kind of attitude that was on Reddit during Gamergate. And I, for my sins, spent a lot of time on discussion forums on Reddit disagreeing with Gamergaters or trying to debate them. This is when I still thought that you could change people's minds through reasoned debate. I no longer believe that.
Logic must prevail.
But this is the kind of thing that they believed. They were more careful about saying it, but they believed that women were fundamentally different from men, and they just didn't like video games or tabletop games. And so there was something suspicious or something sinister or deceptive about any woman who was involved in gaming. And certainly if they wanted to critique it or, change it or hold positions of power, there was something...
We can't imagine people exactly like us wanting to play Dungeons and Dragons. Therefore, it is a conspiracy to take it over and destroy it from the inside.
Precisely.
So... This is 2016. I think everything is going fine. Did anything, Rob, happen at the end of 2016 that might make reactionaries feel a little more empowered to express these views more frequently?
Well, as we all know, God Emperor Trump ascended to the throne of America and ushered in 10,000 years of peace and prosperity. He crushed the SJW under his lifted shoe heel. There's no question that reactionaries and conservatives and just mean people in general felt incredibly emboldened by Trump's victory. They felt suddenly they could say anything they wanted. They could go online and be as big a prick as they felt like because Donald Trump was the president. I don't know, they were sort of right. Honestly, like a lot of people went online and said some truly awful things, and we're not really punished for it. This was a low tide for internet moderation.
He didn't make us though stop playing D&D or any or stop posting on Twitter, which is of course kind of what they wanted or something.
Right. They wanted us to shut up and go away. This was a thing that they
or
said.
They wanted us to be there, but to suffer, right? The
right.
Suffering, it's important they feel and witness the suffering.
Well, and this is critical. And maybe we can sort of wrap up with this because there's a lot more to go over, but there's a lot more. This is going to be a 2, possibly a 3-parter, but I think it's important to understand that even when they win, reactionaries are not happy. They do not just want to win, right? They do not want their guy in office. They do not want the Supreme Court to, rule in their favor. I mean, they want these things. But what they really want is a return with a V. They want to return, right? They want to go back to the way things were. And not only is that impossible, but the thing that they are imagining does not exist and never did exist, right? There's nothing to return to. What they want is not possible. So they are constantly frustrated and they are constantly furious because the presence and existence of people who disagree with them and who have different ideas about their hobby is infuriating. But they know that they can't get rid of them, or they know they can't safely or legally get rid of them. Some of them may have different ideas about how to approach that depending on how radical they are. But this stops them from ever truly feeling satisfied or feeling like they have succeeded, even when they do objectively win.
An example of this is in early 2016, and this was never too big or lasted too long. Many gaming or, fascist accounts or alt-right accounts, which was the new buzzword at the time, mostly in Europe, but some in the United States, began sharing memes on Twitter, Facebook, and forums equating orcs with immigrants, minorities, and refugees, along with your typical, you can insert the easiest thing to come up with, like make Gondor great again. These were posted using hashtags orcophobia, orc posting, and later Orc Lives Matter. I thought this was interesting, Rob, in that, images of orcs from D&D or more frequently from the Lord of the Rings movies were posted with, captions or headlines about refugees, immigrants.
Oh, yeah. God, I forgot all about this. Anti-immigrant sentiment is actually feels like at a low tide compared to what it used to be, because in 2016 and around them there was a situation on
this was Trump's build the wall, this was the refugee crisis in Europe, this was the height of these things.
I forgot all about this, but also I forgot about Keck. This is so dumb. The listeners, I'm going to tell you I'm going to share some of one of the stupidest facts that I know, and now it'll be in your brain too. But in the video game that is now old enough to drink, 18-year-old World of Warcraft, once upon a time, I don't know if this is still the case, Horde and Alliance characters could inhabit the same zone. And if you typed LOL into the general chat, the opposing side would see it, but it would be translated. It would go through a weird gibberish translator. Anyway, if you were on the Horde side and you typed LOL, it came out as Keck. And Keck became some sort of like right-wing, alt-right meme. If you have ever seen a Keckistan flag, that is where it comes from. It comes from World of fucking Warcraft. Anyway.
These people are so lame, man.
They're such like losers.
Being involved in like politics is important and good, but like, God damn it, you're never gonna catch me like using World of Warcraft things.
This is also where Pepes come from, right? This is the rare Pepes, the Pepe the Frog, It has origin in GamerGate and 4chan, and it really takes off around now. Like, listen, I understand. Actually, I think it's also important to understand that it is very clear why people are involved in this, and it's because it feels like they belong to something. It's the same reason that TERFs have formed a community, because they have nothing going on in their lives, and they're like, suddenly I am part of a beautiful crusade to defend women against trans people. I don't know. It gives people something to believe in, and something to feel, and people who care about, they don't care about them, but the illusion that they are part of a community of people who are fellow travelers. And this is a major failing of our politics, of the modern world, of the alienation of capitalism. These people, some of them are irredeemable, but for the most part, they just must be given something to do and to care about. And if they don't, these communities, for lack of a better word, will attract them. And the issue with, the alt-right, with reactionary communities, is that they accept everybody, because nothing is off limits. Nothing is too objectionable, right, to them. as long as you are willing to attack the right people. And that makes recruiting very easy.
I think I wanted to leave us on this idea of orc posting.
Orc posting.
In that, this idea that, taking a very real current of racism from Tolkien's work and a lot of, anti, let's say, civilized, or, that in air quotes, or anti, orcs are always coded in Dungeons and Dragons as people from, not cities,
sure.
right? From
tribal,
the wilderness.
Or, barbarians or something.
And of course, in Lord of the Rings, coded as people from Asia, right?
Yes.
And so this sort of spillover into, or combination of this wave of anti-immigrant sentiment combined with all these 4chan GamerGate people steeped in World of Warcraft and Lord of the Rings and D&D, right? Using the image as the orc to represent the other, right? And
right.
using it to say, it's okay to kill orcs. These people are orcs. Let's kill them. We would never let them into Gondor or Europe or the United States. It sucks, right? But that's what's going on.
This is sort of an aside, but I've because of the Rings of Power and because of our Tolkien discussion recently, I've been doing a lot of reading about this, and Tolkien himself had a much more nuanced understanding of his orcs and in some cases can be even read as anti-racist. He mentions in a letter to his son, I think about World War II, that I think orcs are as real a creation as anything in realistic fiction. Only in real life, they are on both sides, of course. He identified the Germans as orcs in another letter, but, I think that he thought of orcs as a type of warmongering industrialist, perhaps, given how he feels about industry in general. But this is the thing I've been thinking about a lot, is even though the origin of orcs is more nuanced, even though Tolkien had a more nuanced view, it is so clear that they have come to represent the other, the Asiatic hordes, black people, just any sort of underclass. And I think this is probably the fault of Dungeons and Dragons, specifically, how it was, how they were depicted in early editions by our lovely Gygax and Arneson, because this is the sort of like core perception of orcs that has persisted, right? Is this savage, untamed, irredeemable other.
Yeah. I think if we're going back to our research questions, what have we learned so far is that currents of reactionary thought in kind of, quote, nerd spaces, unquote, are all intermixed together, right? Speculative fiction, GamerGate. But the thing that really surprised me that I didn't expect to find in my research is that I think you'll find today, and we'll save this for part 2, a lot of the criticism of reactionaries now is squarely directed at 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons and the company WotC, and then independent creators who are often non-white men.
Right.
But in 2016, 2017, that hatred is definitely there, but it's not focused in the same way. Dungeons and Dragons had not yet had its GamerGate. It had not yet had its sad puppy, and maybe in some ways it hasn't, but I think what we'll see in part 2 is that those attacks ramp up. The right-wing YouTube and memosphere in Dungeons and Dragons, and specifically, emerges from its underground lair.
And I think we'll go into this in greater detail, but I think that's because in 2016, 2017, the reactionary nerds still thought that D&D was theirs. They still felt like they owned it. Like it was their thing. It had not yet.
It hadn't been threatened in the way that sci-fi novels or video games
they felt had been, right.
Yeah.
And that is no longer the case. Well,
so what did we learn here? All right. Nothing.
What did we learn?
What did we learn, Palmer?
I don't know. Sir.
We went through the foundations. We traced a through line from basically early conservative thought to more or less the present day. We're setting the stage for what is relatively recent. Again, compared to speculative fiction, compared to video games, compared to other more popular hobbies. I mean, in fiction, Sad Puppies is only the most recent and most relevant version of this. There's been plenty of these flare-ups going back to the 60s or 70s. Or, Ursula Le Guin wrote a novel, a terrific novel, where one of the main characters changes gender based on the phases of the moon. Did I get that right? Whatever. It's a great book. Yeah. Left Hand of Darkness. Read it. So it's not like this is new, but something changes in the 20-teens, and we are living in what I believe is a reactionary moment, and some of that is driven by Trump, some of that is driven by change, but I just think we live in a very conservative reactionary time, and it's I think very tempting for people on both sides to think that's not the case, because there's public displays of gender nonconformity, I don't want to dismiss this, but like token acceptance of different identities, that sort of thing. But in truth, the reactionaries still have a lot of power and a lot of control. And I think that this is what we've been talking about is a relevant and important offshoot of that broader political environment.
Stay tuned for next time. We've got Breitbart, Marvel movies, wheelchairs, the children, and of course, WotC continuing to trip over their own dicks. Rob, thanks for doing this with me. If you have a comment or suggestion, or something you want to add or critique of our history of reaction in D&D, drop us a line at dmofnone@gmail.com. Rob, I turn it over to you to say the thing.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, and keep rolling them dice.